Sorry, I'm a little late. Who's in here? Hey, okay, good. I apologize for being late. I was on a phone call that was not ending with an old coworker. Have you guys ever been on those phone calls where like every time you're like, I have to go, they just continue? Good evening. Okay. I'm going to wait for some people to hop on because I think some people were like refreshing the stream, trying to get in from the Discord, but I'm actually really excited for today's topic. Okay. Maybe we should start. But first of all, get announcements out of the way. I am going live right after this, you know where, on OnlyFans, for a very different kind of live, a much more less talking, more showing, I guess. Although I do talk a lot on those sometimes too. You got a nice rack. Yep. If you're interested in that, go to my OnlyFans at 8, which is in an hour and 20 minutes, and you will see it in its full glory. So yeah. So and also the other announcement is next Monday, I may or may not have a stream. Obviously, I'll let you know on Instagram, and also I'll have my assistant schedule it if I am doing one. I'm going to be traveling, so I will be on the Whatever podcast next Sunday again. So if you guys want to watch that, it is at, I believe, 7 p.m. live Pacific time. I think that's when it's supposed to start, and it might be a little bit after that. And then on Monday, I'm actually going, because that show's in Santa Barbara, I'm going from Santa Barbara to LA to do an interview for the Soft White Underbelly YouTube channel, which I'm really excited. Have you seen Only Sam YouTube video calling out for? Yeah, he's just dumb. Like, he's looking up my fake name, and he's been messaging everyone. So everyone's been like messaging me, like people I've done interviews with, and they're like, be careful, this guy is crazy. And I'm like, I know. I could do a video showing without doxing myself, like blurring out, like, for instance, the reporter at Business Insider that he said I paid for, even though I have the screenshot of her reaching out to me on Twitter asking to do it. And I have the screenshot. He also tried to say Stephen Chung was an alert, which I thought was the funniest part. I also have the DM from him, and I have the email threads of me confirming. They also reached out to my social media management, which does like all the editing on my YouTube videos and stuff. And I actually freaked out because I thought they were going to send him the actual proof. So I quickly messaged the CEO of the company. I was like, don't send him. He's like, yeah, no, we're not going to send him anything. Don't worry. And then he's taking it as nobody has evidence, which is like, what's really happening is nobody's responding to him. And so we'll let him freak out. It's fine. Yes, I got an interview with Mark Leda. He actually called me, and he was like, I did reach out to them on Instagram because I have been watching Soft White Underbelly for years, and I really love the channel. But I think, obviously not purposely, but he's showing sex workers that are in the most dire of predicaments, right? Like, a lot of them are drug addicted, walking the streets of Skid Row, and a lot of people they think that is what sex work is. And I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, very privileged. And I was like, a lot of people think sex work is inherently bad because they're connecting it with the stories that you're showing. And I think people need to see that it's not the sex work that's inherently bad. It's all the other stuff that these women are going through: poverty, drug addiction, etc. And then he called me, and he's like, yeah, let's do it. So we are going to do that next week. So I'm thinking I will be in Santa Barbara on Sunday, and then to do the show, and then Monday travel, and then maybe do the interview on Tuesday. I don't know when he's going to put them out. He seems to push out videos pretty quickly, but that one obviously isn't going to be live. If you can do it without doxing yourself, I think you should post it. I'm going to wait until after I get back because I don't know if the Whatever podcast is going to trigger him more. The problem is I don't want to enrage these people to the point that they spend their whole lives trying to find me, right? Because that's just putting myself at risk of being doxxed. Now, I'm just going to say he's really stupid, borderline illiterate. I think he kind of maybe even alluded to in the video that he's suffering from, he has some mental disabilities and stuff. And so I'm not confident in his ability, but he definitely is very aggressive. Like even this morning, he reached out. I got a DM on Instagram. He reached out to somebody I did a podcast on, and he's like, hey, do you have any proof of this? He's asking lawyer talk on Reddit, and they're all like, well, that's not her real name and you should get a life. And there's this one comment that like haunts me because someone was like, bro, go outside, touch grass. And he's like, I was on the swings when I was writing this. And this is going to sound really mean, but just picturing this man on the swings, like, where are you, on a playground? And like, if you saw the video, he's like drool down his shirt. So I'm just picturing him like with drool coming down his shirt, like on the swings in a playground, being like, is Jasmine Jafar a lawyer? Like, ew. So my goal here is to not trigger these people further. So, and like, at the end of the day, like, for instance, like if I go on a podcast, like if I'm going on the whatever podcast, I am more than willing to show Brian or the producers on the show like my bar card and evidence of that, because I know they're not going to dox me, but I'm never going to dox myself to the public. And for this particular group of people, I think even if I did dox myself, they would still find a way to like not believe me. So yeah. You would have been a good lawyer. So I am a lawyer, but I'm not an experienced one. So that's one thing he said that I'm like, yeah, that's true. Is that I did only work at a firm for around 6-7 months. And then I'm focusing primarily on this. Now, I had a lot of experience, especially in my practice area, because I've basically been working at firms because so much of my family's members are attorneys since I was literally graduated from high school. Like I did it throughout college. But yeah, I mean, I did kind of only really work full time for 6 months. Well, actually, the phone call I was on that made me late was an old colleague, my work BFF. I guess you'd call him my work husband. He was in the office next to me. We were like this. He's like a 55-year-old Mormon guy. And I actually didn't tell him about my OnlyFans. He just knew he said he put it together, kind of. And then he saw me on Business Insider and he messaged me back in March and he was like, oh, hey, cool. Like totally supportive. And then he just, he's leaving the firm. So he called me now. We're actually going to get lunch on Thursday. How do you trigger someone if they're already triggered? I think you can trigger them further, which is not my goal. When is the whatever podcast you'll be on? It'll be next Sunday, so the 20th. I've been practicing since 2008. You have the right stuff. Thank you. Well, it's funny because the whole time I was at the firm and I would do networking events, they're like, she's got it. She's going to be good. She's blah, blah, blah. And the whole time in my head, I'm like, but I want to do OnlyFans. What's your opinion on Andrew Tate? So we're kind of going to talk about all that today. So I feel like, especially with a lot of this podcast I've been going on, including whatever, obviously Fresh and Fit, I've been really raging against a lot of the ideas that are put forth in the manosphere, which the manosphere involves like the Andrew Tate kind of world, the red-pilled world, because a lot of the stuff that they say is absolute bullshit. And it just is. But I also do not think that this means that there isn't any issues that men are struggling with, because that's just that's just not true. I think a lot of the stuff that they say is actually false, and especially the advice that they give is just going to make things worse, right? Like Fresh and Fit telling you to like kind of get into this like type of man is just going to lead these men into a worse place, and we're going to talk about that today. However, I think a really great resource, so I just finished this. This is Of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It by Richard Reeves. There are great resources, but I would say Richard Reeves is probably one of the most prominent in actual academia that are talking about these issues in a way that's nuanced, that's fact-based, and in a way that's actually putting forth policies that could actually change things and improve the lives of men, doing so in a way that doesn't pit men and women against each other, blame men for their problems, blame feminism for their problems, but also I think giving some valid criticism. So he actually has a chapter, I think it's 8 and 9. He has chapter 8, which actually criticizes hardcore progressives that like to believe none of this is happening, like to believe there's no biological differences between, like, those really radical people on the left. And I don't think that they're that prominent. And then he spends the next chapter criticizing the right wing, the manosphere, because they are on the opposite end of the spectrum. They think everything's biology. They don't think cultural and socialization have anything to do with it. They think feminism is the problem. And I think one of the most detrimental pillars of their philosophy is that they really push for turning the clock back and going back into traditionalism because they think that's when men flourish. Number one, it's never going to happen. So Richard Reeves, I think rightfully, he calls it bring backery, like, oh, bring back, like kind of the whole Trump movement, bring back this, that's just not going to happen. We're not going to go back. We can only go forward. And so he does a good job of being like, let's figure out what men's role is in the future with gender equality in mind, because that's just where we're headed, instead of trying to turn the clock back, because we're not going to do that. You tell them, why were you on the Fresh and Fit on the Fresh and Fit podcast? I heard they do like a hazing to let people on there. No, there is a guy. He was actually the guy that was trying to help me get my Instagram back when it was banned. And he was just like, oh, what do you want to do with your and I was like, I want to do these podcasts. So he just messaged them and got me on. He also got me on the Whatever podcast, and we're trying to get on some more. So no, they didn't haze me. I actually didn't even talk to them. Nothing. Got the pre-show information. That was, if you guys saw the episode, I didn't even know that it came from Icy. I didn't know who Icy was. I actually didn't even know. I think Hazard, if he's in here, when I got that list and they're like, tell him Icy sent you. I thought that was just like a typo in there, or like something they left in there, because the whole thing was so poorly written that I thought it was some promotion for like a club in Miami, that I wasn't even going to do it until Hazard was like, I think you should message the producer and say Icy sent you. I was like, what do you mean Icy sent? So no, they didn't haze me at all. I dislike let's rewind to traditional values and practices, such nonsense. They cherry pick the benefits that were mostly in their favor. Yes. And a lot of so I think this book, while being a great resource for men and for everybody, is a big debunking of a lot of the shit that the guys on Fresh and Fit say about women being better suited for the home, blah, 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 blah. I mean, this book, and we're going to talk about it, makes it clear that women are fucking killing it. And that doesn't mean everything's perfect now and equal, but a lot of the inequalities between men and women can hurt both sides. But women, especially when it comes to education and even labor, like, we're fucking killing it. We're killing it. And all of the stuff that they say, oh, women, they're so irrational, they're so this, they're so that. Now I think we actually have a legitimate reason to push for, how are we going to have men catch up to women? Because y'all are falling behind, which I don't think is good. And I think, and he does propose some solutions for that. I was in the middle of actually taking notes for this before my old colleague called me. So at the end of this might be a little bit more disorganized, and we might even do a part 2 if we don't get to everything today, because I definitely want this to be a discussion, and we have like about an hour now because I was late. I do think Brian from Whatever is low-key annoying with how he nitpicks so much and is so perfect. Yes, I mean, he is annoying, but he's not the level of, like, I know it's a very low bar, but he's not the way that Fresh and Fit are. I do think he falls into a lot of the trap that Richard Reeves talks about. Not to the extent. So for instance, Brian is not one to say that he doesn't like women that are intelligent. He actually says he likes women that are intelligent. Fresh and Fit are the ones who, and actually Richard Reeves went on the show, Rollo and Michael Sartain show. And I think it was really funny because those guys they're always blah, 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 blah. But when Richard Reeves was on, they were silent. They were like, yeah. And I was like, wait a second, why aren't you pushing back? Because you guys don't believe a lot of the shit that he says. And Reeves said, he's like, first of all, I don't know where you guys are getting your idea of what men like in women, but we have very different ideas on that. A lot of men, including him, he's like, I like women who are educated, who are ambitious, who are blah, blah, blah. And they're just sitting there like, and I'm like, really? Because you guys spend 90% of your show talking about how women doesn't matter if women are smart or not. They just need to be low body counts or whatever. but I was like, yeah, because it's hard for them too. And I like how he criticized their overuse of like Buss in particular. So Buss is like the evolutionary psychologist of the manosphere, because and I think even his data they misuse, but he is like the one academic that they follow. And I remember Rollo was like, well, Buss says that all culture is downstream from evolutionary biology. And Richard Reeves like, yeah, of course he's going to say that. He's an evolutionary biologist. And he talks about this in the book too, that it's not whether it's nature or nurture. It's clearly both. The question is, how much of each is it? And that's where people can disagree. I'm interested in this vision after criticizing both left and right. Yeah. So he spends a whole chapter criticizing both. And I agree with most of his criticisms. Andrew Tate encourages men to work to secure the life of their wives and kids and stop being lazy. You call that bullshit, and you encourage women to join OnlyFans. No hate, we're just chatting. I don't think that is the only thing that Andrew Tate promulgates. And we're going to talk about today how that message isn't where, like, I think I agree with Reeves, who is much more qualified than Andrew Tate. And this book is full of stats. The whole thing is stats, studies, stats. This is a very well-researched book. And Andrew Tate says that reading is for stupid people and it's for slow-brained people. Again, that's diametrically opposed to all the research we have, that reading actually takes more brain power and makes you smarter, makes you better able to think critically, better reading comprehension, etc. So maybe Andrew tells you not to read, but I think you should read so that you don't fall for his bullshit. Okay, is OnlyFans passive income? It's passive income. Depends how you define passive income. Like it's passive income in the sense that, like, I sleep and I wake up and I just made a bunch of money overnight, but I also work the day before, put up stuff, promoted, put out stuff, extras in DMs and stuff. So it's not passive in that sense. So it depends. Some people consider passive income as you don't do anything, like it's just like building on its own. So in that sense, it's not. Some people consider passive income as like, it's not like hourly or salary, and you don't have to physically be like working like for your wage all the time. Okay. So let us start. Okay. So I have notes for the at least beginning of the stuff I wanted to talk about. And then at the end, which we might not even get to today. So there may be a part 2. Maybe we could do part 2 and talk more about solutions, but I wanted to spend today talking about this. So like I said, Reeves critiques both sides, and he focuses on 3 areas where men are struggling. So number 1, education. Number 2, the labor force. And number 3, their role in the family. So a lot of it he spends on like fatherhood, for instance. For me, I don't like my girlfriend to enter OF. People can see the boobs and ask for my girlfriend for $5 a month. In that case, the body of my woman is worth less than Okay, that's cool. You can think that way, but you're not representative of a lot of people. And it's funny because a lot of the guys who say this, they're sitting here watching me go find a woman that you want to be with. So anyways, so talking about school. So women are outperforming men in school basically by every metric, which is crazy, right? Because a long time ago, not even that long ago is actually the thing. Nobody predicted to us trying to decrease the gender gap in education would happen so quickly. Not only that, because now it's completely gone, it's reversed. It's completely reversed. So now not only are women caught up to men, women are outperforming men across all test scores. Standardized tests were like the one that men were, like the SAT, ACT was the one where men were still doing a little better in, but actually that's decreased. In the ACT, it's completely gone. Higher GPAs, Like Finland, for instance, he talks about it because there's so much gender equality, and the schools in Finland are doing amazing. Like they're scoring like among the highest in the world. And that's almost solely because of the women. So women are really dominating when it comes to education. They are 14 percentage points more likely to be school ready even by kindergarten. So they're more likely to take advanced classes, IB classes. Where's Palm Tree Killer? Me and Palm Tree Killer went to high school together, and he was in IB classes. I actually was so lazy in high school, and I remember I was signing up for classes in my English class, and my teacher comes to me because I was very book smart. She's like, "You need to be an IB. You should not." And I was like, "Okay." So I circled it, and when she left, I erased it. I saw the transition firsthand of women flooding the classroom. So yeah, women are also more likely to graduate. Women have higher GPAs. Women are even we're scoring higher than men even in STEM subjects. In every so math. So this idea that like okay, well, I don't know how to go back. Okay. Sorry guys. I'm still getting used to a MacBook. So this idea we're fresh and fit. Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to decline that person because I've been ignoring them for like days, mostly because if you tried to FaceTime me a few days ago, I had just done PRF. You can kind of still see where they take the blood. It's where they draw your own blood plasma, and they like, and I have dark circles under my eyes, hereditary ones, and it's really helped with brightness. It's like a skincare thing. Okay. Anyways, so yeah, so despite what people on Fresh and Fit tell you that women are just dumber and this and that, we seem to not be dumber when it comes to school, even in math, science, all of these things. Thinking critically, I guess, is not just for men. But I would say the reason Richard Reeves says it's the case, which is based in a lot of data and actual, like, it's just true. Boys' prefrontal cortex develops slower than women's. And so boys have a much harder time in school. Women seem to be much more organized, more likely to do their homework, et cetera, and their brains are more developed. So one of Richard Reeves's policy changes that he advocates for is actually something called redshirting, which is starting boys in school a year later. And that parents who do that, their boys seem to end up doing a lot better. And unfortunately, it seems the people most likely to do this redshirting are more affluent families. The boys that actually need it the less are the parents are doing it for them. And it's giving them great results, but it would obviously be really beneficial for men of backgrounds that actually struggle more. So he spends a lot of time in the book. I'm not going to get into that too much, talking about how a lot of these disparities obviously disproportionately impact Black boys in general. And sorry, I was reading the text, but disproportionately affects Black boys and boys of lower socioeconomic status. So he spends a whole chapter talking about how Black men and boys in general are the ones that are suffering the most, even compared to Black women. And Black women now are, I think one of the stats was, Black women are more likely to get a college degree. And was it a college degree? I want to make sure. It was either graduating or a college degree, so don't quote me on it. It's one of the two. Maybe I screenshotted it or wrote it down somewhere. Than a white man. So it's and that Black men and boys tend to fare far worse coming from like low income neighborhoods than their women do, even their own sisters, when it comes to if they live in areas of crime, etc. They're more likely to have those adverse negative effects than women do. And that's something that largely gets forgotten when we're talking about race and class, is we leave out the gender disparities, which isn't good. And I think that is a critique of the left, is like, well, you need to talk about it. I remember he was saying on on that podcast I was watching, he's like, it's really hard for me because sometimes I'm trying to fight against this manosphere and I'm talking to one of these crazy men's rights activist people, and I call and he's like, I was on the phone with them, and he's like, no, men are committing suicide way more than women. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, and if you go on their page, they have by race, they have by socioeconomic class, but they don't have by gender. And he's like, see, they don't care about us. They don't even put it on there. And he's like, that's a good point. And I think so too. Is we hardly ever talk about it because for so long, and I think there's good reason, it's been disproportionately affecting women negatively. So a lot of people get scared about saying, actually, you know, men need help too. And maybe in some areas we should now put the focus on them. I was the only man in my cohort becoming an educator. We're going to talk about that. Women are outperforming men because women are nearly triple in men's world. That's why we'll see them in every job. I'm not saying that women are stupid or stuff like that. It's just a fact. Well, women are also scoring like average. They're doing better in school. So like they're scoring better than you. They're getting higher GPAs than you. They're graduating at higher rates than you. So it's not that more women are graduating than men. It's that women are, well, that's true that more women are graduating than men, but that's not because there's necessarily more of them. It's saying that if you have 15 boys and 15 girls in a class, the girls are going to do better on those exams than the 15 boys. So I'm not here to, you know, if there are men in here who are trying to argue that women are statistically stupider, I actually have a lot of evidence that would point to the opposite, but I don't even necessarily think that's the case. I think there are things we can do to level the playing field, such as starting boys in school a year later. There's a line he said, the difference is not how male and female brains develop, but when. So we're not saying that men, there's something wrong with their brains. They just develop later, and that impacts their performance in school. So like I said, starting them a year later, having an extended kindergarten year for them is one of the things he talks about that could change this. So not only are we getting more degrees, we're getting, especially when it comes to higher degrees, we're getting the same right now, we're equal or even more when it comes to law degrees, dentistry, and doctors. So they're equal now, which in just in the 70s and 80s, it was so different. And in just like a short period of time, now women are caught up as doctors, as lawyers, as dentists. So even these higher education jobs are becoming dominated by women, and women aren't just getting more degrees in stereotypical women fields. Like we're getting half of the business degrees now and stuff. So women are also doing very well in STEM subjects, which are subjects that apparently men are naturally better at. So one of the disparities is that women, there's been such a push to get women into STEM, but there hasn't been a push to get men into those more traditionally, I guess, female jobs. So he talks a lot about, there's the acronym for STEM. He talks a lot about HEAL and how there needs to be a push to get men into HEAL jobs, which is health, education, administration, and literacy. So those four, he's trying to, and I think that's great. I think it's great. And we'll talk about some of that more, but let me see. Check your facts before opening your mouth. The difference is the U.S. and 2 more million. Yeah, I don't think that's even if that was true, that wouldn't explain these stats. I've heard of the staggering approach from a long time ago, but I was too young to pay attention to the convo and the reasons why it wasn't practiced in my country. I don't know what country you're in. I'm curious. But yeah, I think there's a really great case to make that men would benefit greatly by just waiting for their brains to get to the point where women are, because it seems like once you get older, like in adulthood, these differences don't seem to be as the contrast isn't as severe. But in adolescence and in young children, which is the ages where school matters, like you're in school, that seems to be where it's the biggest difference. So women, and interestingly, something I found really interesting is policy initiatives that they've used to help kids in school graduate, even for young kids before socialization would really take like a huge effect, right? Like kindergarten, whatever. Those initiatives seem to only help women. Men don't benefit from all these programs, like trying to make sure kids graduate. There's been some that work, but there's been a lot that just don't work on men. They seem to overwhelmingly help women graduate, help women do better in school, help women not like all of that. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to be helping our boys. And he doesn't even have, he doesn't know why. Nobody really knows why, but we can make some guesses and try to at least put that into policy. And I like what he said about like, well, this is something that we need to think about, because we're just throwing money at these policies with half of the population not benefiting from them, and yet we're just throwing more money at it when maybe we should adjust things. Because if you have a policy and you're spending all this money on it and it's not benefiting half of the population, there's a problem. And I agree with that. I really like the distinction between the brain development between men and women is when they develop, not if they do. Yeah. So once you get into adulthood, it seems to be the same. But women's like the prefrontal cortex and one more area of the brain and men develop slower. And this is not, I feel like this isn't crazy, even anecdotally. And so this is not to say women are doing better than men because we're smarter. But, you know, we all usually hear the opposite from the manosphere. We're supposed to be dumber. And I'm like, if we're dumber, then why are we fucking kicking your ass? But the reason we're actually kicking your ass is not because you guys are dumber. It's just because your brain develops more slowly. And then we start at the same time, which gives girls like a 2-year advantage over men. And 2-year advantage over men is a big deal when you're like 14, 15, 16. It's not a huge deal when you're 42, right? But when you're in that critical age, it really does affect men, and boys are clearly more likely, like it's much easier for women to do what they need to do well in school than it is for boys at that age. Boys seem to do really well with vocational tasks too. So he has a few policy initiatives that he's in favor of, and one of them is to bring more vocational training into schools, because boys seem to do better when they're working with their hands as opposed to the tests, and the way that the school system is also set up. The way things are taught seem to be taught in a way that in general, there's a lot of overlap. And he talks about this a lot, that when we talk about, and this is a big mistake the manosphere makes, is they talk about, they look at the intergroup variation, not the intragroup variation. So they're like, oh, boys are more likely to be like this and women are more likely to be like this. And that's the end of the thing. And he calls it, in economics, it's called statistical discrimination. So basically, like, you see somebody, it's just oh, well, you're a man and men are more likely to like things and women are more likely to like people. So this is one thing. And he talked about this on the podcast too, and he brought it up in his book. So for instance, there is this people things distinction, that women in general like people, men in general like things. And that's true when we look at the averages, but there's a lot of overlap in that, almost 47% overlap. So, and he criticizes people like Peterson, who are like, well, the reason there's only 15% engineers, or that's even new, it used to be 5%, is just because women aren't as interested in engineer. There was a great study done by 2 psychologists that showed that if people were actually like, if things were equal and people were actually picking occupations based on their interest, it would be about 30% female engineers and it would be about 30% male nurses. So yes, it still would be less than 50%, but it'd be much higher than 5 or 15%, right? So this is something, this nuance is very hard for stupid people to understand. Like, and I'm not saying Jordan Peterson's stupid, but I think a lot of the manosphere is, where they're like, oh, men like this, men like cars, women like dolls, end of story. And it's like, no, there's a lot of overlap there. And so you need to say, okay, there are less engineers than, and even if all things were equal, there might still be less, but 30% is a much different number, or when it comes to nurses too. So there's certain things, that differences between men and women have a lot of overlap. And if you're the type of person that likes to go black and white, I'm going to put you in a box, then this is going to be a very, I guess, difficult thing for you to comprehend, which is that it's not that simple. Also, it's freezing in here. That's why my voice is shaking. What's going on, Jasmine? What are we talking about? We are talking about boys and men struggling and what we can do about it, because I do think there are some great things to talk about when it comes to that. Jordan Peterson went to my school, apparently. Are you in Toronto? I know he was in Toronto or was he in Vancouver, BC, or Toronto? But that's just where he was teaching. I actually don't know where he grew up. My friend's husband went to school with Michael Knowles. I thought Michael Knowles was older, but he's only 33 apparently. and my friend's husband's like 32, so they were like in the same class. I was dying because she might actually come on the Whatever podcast with me, but I was listening to their last episode. I listened to like 20 minutes of it before I'm like, I can't do this. Because I used to listen to it before I went on the first time, but I'm like, all right, I kind of get it. And one of the girls on there was saying how they were playing the clip of Mia Khalifa talking about relationships. And she was like, well, sex workers have larger amygdalas. And I was like, and I've looked high and low for this. There's no evidence that sex workers have larger amygdalas. There is a lot of evidence, I've talked about this before, that conservatives have larger amygdalas. And she was like, her husband will die on this hill that conservatives are mentally, I don't believe this, mentally ill. And he points to those amygdala studies. And she's like, yeah, sex workers can't regulate their emotions because they have a bit larger amygdalas. I was like, wait a second. The only evidence I'm finding is that you have a larger amygdala. You are saying that women's are giving positive things and they're outperforming in every job. I can't see that in a lot of jobs. We're talking about education right now. We're going to talk about jobs next. So actually we can transition into jobs. So men are losing ground in the labor market. So for one thing, like the wage gap. So women's wages have been increasing to kind of lower that gap, but men's have been stagnant and actually declining. So I screenshotted one of the stats for you guys. Oh shit, yeah. There's a lot in here. We might not get to all of this today. But for men who are at work, pay levels are typically lower than in the past. The median real hourly wage for men peaked sometime in the 1970s and has been falling since. While women's wages have risen across the board over the last 4 decades, wages for men on most rungs of the earnings ladder have stagnated. Only men at the top have seen strong earnings growth. Men who entered the workforce in 1983 will earn about 10% less in real terms across their working life than those who started out in 1967. For women, by contrast, lifetime earnings have risen by 33% over the same time period. In the dry words of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the long-term trend in men's earnings has been quite different than that for women. Now, to be fair, women, we didn't start out with what men started out with, but I think there is something to say about how over like the past few decades, women have been getting better and better and men have been getting worse, which obviously is going to create issues. She did not say women are outperforming men in all fields. No, I said that women are outperforming men educate in test scores across all subjects. That's true. But again, this isn't me saying, oh, because women are smarter. I think a lot of that does have to do with the things I talked about. And the evidence does show that those boys who get redshirted start later, a lot of that can disappear. So what's been shown is that the top 20% of society, for both men and women, the top 20% of earners, they've been doing great. So we know this, right? Capitalism, wage gap, wage inequality is actually what's been getting worse and worse and worse. So the top 20% of people, their wages have been growing steadily. And we're going to actually talk later about their marriage rates and all of that has actually been steady and the same. And growing. Whereas, so a lot of the stuff you hear on Fresh and Fit about, oh, college, women shouldn't be, women who are educated are fucking doing great in all rings of life. And men, like educated couples are the only ones kind of not suffering. Those couples that are educated, those ones in the top 20% of earners on both ends. He also had a really great line. Equality is easier for the affluent. And I love that. So I'm going to admit I was kind of in a bubble. And before the manosphere, I was like, and even when I first heard about it, I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, who thinks like this anymore? We're in every couple I know is pretty egalitarian, equal. This shit isn't even, but reading this book, I realized quite a bit. And even before this, just like looking at what I've been looking at, I realized quite a bit that this is easier for people in the top ranks to achieve. So kind of like the stuff I've said on some of these podcasts is lawyers are marrying other lawyers. There's male lawyers, there's female lawyers. It's not like, and something he talks about is it's actually those really affluent women who can afford to take time off and raise the kids for a couple years, and they're more likely to do that when their husband makes a lot of money. But husbands who make a lot of money in general also marry women who were making a lot of money and were in like the same ranks as them, and they take the time off. So a lot of these disparities are affecting middle class and lower class men and women, which is no surprise, but that's not what you hear a lot of the times in the manosphere. And if we're not going to diagnose the problem correctly, then we're definitely not going to be able to put forth efficient solutions. I mean, some jobs, they look like they're created for a special gender. For example, men outperforming in vehicle mechanics, bricks, masons, plumbers, and for women outperforming in maids and nursing and skin specialists. Okay, well, here's where you're gonna get fucked. Is you're right, but the things that men are generally outperforming men are the ones that are at risk for going to automation. So free trade and automation are hurting men way more than they're hurting women, which is one of the reasons that men have been struggling in the labor market and women haven't. So automation and free trade hurts men more than it hurts women. Jobs most susceptible to automation affect more men than the jobs that women do. So those heel jobs, education, healthcare, those type of jobs, literacy, are not at risk of automation or free trade getting in the way of. But a lot, especially jobs that we are a long shift away from jobs that need physical strength. So those manual labor jobs that men are really good at, some of the stuff you're talking about, vehicle mechanics, blah, blah, blah. Those are the jobs that are going to go away, and they've been going away. So I'm not saying men shouldn't be strong physically. And actually, an interesting stat in the book was that actually, as this has been happening, men are actually less strong. And there's a study on grip strength, and the grip strength of men now versus back when these jobs were more prominent has changed quite a bit. So it's interesting because a lot of the stuff that the manosphere tells you, which is, again, that bring back, let's go back, men be physically strong, men be this, those are not going to help you in 2023. Again, I've said this before, they almost seem to always revert back to this apocalyptic fetish of like, well, if the world is ending, men are going to be in charge. If we're at war with our neighboring village with bows and arrows and swords, then men are going to be useful. If you're hanging off a cliff, men are going to be useful. You're right, but that's not the reality of 2023. And if that is what you tell men to focus on rather than things like emotional intelligence, EQ, those type of things, you're just setting men up for failure, because those jobs that require that brute strength are not as common anymore as they used to be. That's not going to serve you very well. The most successful men in society aren't the men, unless you're going to be a pro UFC fighter, aren't the men that are just stronger than everybody else. This isn't hunter-gatherer times. We've changed. And we've been evolving as a species, I've said this before, for millions of years. And now we're seeing that this shift, and people are like, men aren't masculine anymore. Men are soft. Well, that softness is actually there for a reason, because those men that are, these men that are soft, like I would say other lawyers I know, other like doctors I know that don't hold these views, they're the ones that are successful. You won't find neurosurgeons watching Fresh and Fit. It's just not a thing. Their audience can't even read and write. Like you can, and it's funny because even they pointed out, like, guys, make sure you spell check before, because it's really bad. And I feel bad for these guys, because these are the guys struggling. And part of the reason they're struggling is because they're not very smart, to be honest with you. And the guys that are very smart are the ones that don't hold these very rigid men, women, gender role thing. And they're doing well. The men that are more egalitarian, the men that are more like they see women as equals because they're in, like someone like me who went to school and then we went to law school. 50% of us are women. The men respected the women in law school. There was no, I'm a man. Like that's just not a thing. And they're all off working together at different firms, fighting cases together. They're doing it all together. And you don't see, like, when they hear about this stuff, like when I show them this, they're shocked, because that's just not how they. And part of that comes from privilege. So I'm privileged, they're privileged. But I want to emphasize, because it seems to be at least one of you in here who really resonates with their message. They're setting you up for failure. That's all they're doing. They're setting you up for failure. One, things are not going to go back the way it was. So we should talk about how to adapt men's and their role into current society. And two, a lot of the traits that they're telling you guys to focus on, and you're a man and strong and this and that, aren't going to help you in today's market. I called them out because of all their spelling errors and all over there. I'm like, look, I don't know what you're telling these boys to do, but unless you're going to tell them all to be podcasters, if they write an email like this, they're not going to get a job. You're not going to get, you can't even get a secretary job if you write an email the way Fresh and Fit office is run or podcast room is run. And so if you're going to be talking about male improvement and being successful, you have to have these basic skills, such as making sure you proofread your pre-show information, or you have signs all over your studio that are all full of errors. That's not going to make these men successful. The men that are doctors, are lawyers, are in that 20% of high income earners, financial advice, whatever, they know they don't write and speak like that. The men in the Discord, they don't write and speak like that. And I think some of that is due to privilege, like you can't help it. But I feel so bad that the men who need help the most are the ones being sucked into this message that's going to do nothing but make their predicament worse. What do you mean you don't need to be strong and bullshit? If you're in danger, you need a strong man to get you. Yeah, okay, this is the whole point. Life, most of us are not in danger anymore. It's 2023. So I don't know what country you're in. Maybe you're in, and you do see that gender roles are more rigid in countries that are war-torn, in third world countries that are doing worse, where there's more poverty, more people are starving. Those countries have more rigid gender roles. In industrialized, modern, technologically advanced countries, we have less rigid gender roles. And the reason for that is those qualities of men are not as needed here. That doesn't mean men can't be strong. That doesn't mean being strong is a bad thing. But for you to constantly have your worth as a man be on how strong you are and how much you can protect people from danger, there's a good chance you'll go the majority of your life without needing to protect anyone from danger. Most of us live very safely. Crime has actually declined significantly from even like the 90s and stuff. So as these gender roles actually have become less rigid, there also seems to be less crime because men are not expressing their masculinity in a way that's toxic. We can talk. He really is against toxic masculinity. I kind of disagree with him on that. He talks about how it's the expression of masculinity that can be toxic. So he's like, the same masculinity that has men run into a building to save people is the same one that causes them to rape people. And he says it's difference in expression. And I think that, yeah, but one expression is toxic and one is not toxic. So it may be just semantics, but I don't think there's anything wrong with pointing out toxic masculinity in the sense of the way that certain masculine traits are expressed can be toxic or they can be helpful. And men who are just sitting there like thinking that their worth as a man is based on brute physical strength that's not a recipe for success in the West. It's just not. So I would urge you to maybe build up some of your other skills because you're more than that. Like that's the thing. I feel like these shows just degrade men into being nothing but, big, strong men and ATM machines. You're more than an ATM machine and you're more than your physical strength. And I feel really bad that these men are convincing you that you're not, especially because those are not the things that are going to serve you. Okay, let me see a couple of the comments. Oh, why can't I go up? There we go. What are you going to do if a man puts a gun to your head? This is what I mean. The likelihood of that is slim to none. I'm sorry. Most people are going to go through life. Most women are going to go through life, especially affluent women, without ever having a gun to your head. Doesn't mean it's impossible. But also, this is the thing. There's like this idea that men now are soft and they're not going to help. That's the farthest thing from this truth. These liberal boys are still the men that will step up and protect people weaker than them. That we haven't been socialized out of that. In fact, I would say these men are probably more likely to. Um, your friends, your coworkers, even like my palm tree killer in here. He's gay, and he still walks on the outer part of the sidewalk and has me on the inner part of the sidewalk. Like to think that these men that aren't like out here like fresh and fit are no longer protecting people that are weaker than them. A lot of them think that one expression of masculinity is protecting people that are weaker than you. So I don't think that's gone away from society. I haven't seen any evidence that like if there's an old lady that fell on the street, that back in the day everybody would help her, but now all these men are like, oh, my nails, I don't like. That's just not a thing. um and that's true, there are a lot of brave women as well. What would you say to those who would say your opinion is biased in regards to you speaking from your current perspective on the subject? I mean, we're all kind of biased, but I'm going off right now. I'm not even speaking from my perspective. I'm speaking on Richard Reeves, who has researched this for years and has been a big academic voice in this. So this whole discussion is based on this. He probably has biases. I probably have biases, but the difference is that we try really hard, which is why I wrote down all these stats to talk about it and to talk about data and what's been shown with data. So, for instance, yeah, it's not my opinion that jobs requiring brute strength are way less needed than they used to be and are going away pretty much. That's what the data says, or that those jobs that are at risk for being lost due to automation are disproportionately affecting men. That's not my opinion. None of like these stats are not my opinion. They're just stats. Because men actually take a bigger part in rearing children. We are aware of the abuses that men inflict on themselves and others. Reverting to the old days also brings about all the horrors that men suffered from and created without opposition. So, yeah, going back is not the answer. But I do think the left has failed in addressing some of the ways that some of those gaps have been reversed because they've been pushing forward for good reason. And I love that Richard Reeve says this. He said, and I actually wrote it down, that women entering the workforce has been one of the greatest things. So, like, no, he doesn't want to go back. I don't want to go back. We've added $2 trillion to the economy since the 1970s by women being in the workforce than if we stayed at the levels that women were in the workforce in the 1970s. We've added $2 trillion to our economy. This is a good thing. Women being in these roles and having this freedom is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And he talks about that, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we want to leave men behind, or that we don't want to talk about how maybe some of these consequences. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, I think, is a really big one. So I'm excited for that. But let me go down more. Yeah, someone else said that. It doesn't have to be a brave man. A brave person with skills to fight can protect from physical. Yeah. And I also, so like what the caveat I said, it doesn't have to be these macho men, like liberal men, what you guys call soy boys. They're just as brave, if not more brave, I'd say, than a lot of you. Jasmine, do you think that these men that want to go back in time are viewing the past in a romanticized way? Like, yes. Especially because you see it a lot from young men in the manosphere. It's like, you weren't even here. And the funniest thing is when you see it from men of color. Because men of color, I'm like, you really want to go back? Ooh. They don't have any idea what going back would entail because they weren't there. And so it's like they miss something that they were never a part of. Um yes, I am in the US West because it's still day. So it is about 7:30 here, which is why you see the sun setting. Okay, so one thing that he points out that I think is important to point out is that while women have been catching up to men and men haven't, like with wages, the biggest gap is actually for working and middle class people in the upper class. So the gender pay gap narrowed by 19 points and the class gap went up by 13 points. So this is something that's also heavily fueling things, is that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And a lot of those poorer are men. And so much of male identity this is the big part that I really like. So much of male identity is caught up in their role as a provider and the breadwinner, and circumstances are changing to the point where if that's all your identity is based on, then you're going to feel lost and defeated by these circumstances. My moderator wants, no, we don't have to mute these people. I'll tell you if somebody needs to be muted. As a black man, I react the same. It's like it was good for what you're. Yeah, I do not know. Women catching up to men, LMAO, because women down hella bad. They trying to upset the patriarchy. Huh? It was good for what kind of men back then? Yeah, it wasn't you guys, unfortunately. And like I said, he spends a whole. What chapter was it? I think it was chapter 4. Must be. Yeah, black boys and men face acute challenges, a whole chapter for that. So even in today's society, even compared to black women, and there's been a lot of support and push for black women and women in general, especially black women being disproportionately affected by a lot of elements of sexism, which is true. But black men also face very unique challenges, sometimes even in certain ways worse than black women. And a lot of that's largely ignored by the party that's supposed to be helping them, which is the left. And so that's why these right-wing conservatives come in, and he talks about that in the critique of the conservatives, how they use these struggles of men, and it's almost becoming that like Republicans are like the male party, and it shouldn't be that way. But it's because these men are so distraught and down bad, since like the guy said, that they are angry, and they're doing this bring America back again, which is not going to happen, especially when it comes to social roles. And they think that the answer is in going back, and it's not. Does the book talk about how the patriarchy is bad for men and women? Yes, it does. It talks about how that's the whole point of the book. So it says of boys and men, why the modern male is struggling, why it matters, and what to do about it. I actually think it's a good book. And he does talk about how gender equality should be a push. Gender equality is not a one-way street. It doesn't only negatively impact gender inequality. Doesn't only negatively impact women. It also negatively impacts men. And pushing for gender equality should really be pushing for gender equality for both genders. So yes. Remember when OnlyFans almost banned nudity? If that happens, girls, you are done. Get ready to back to cooking my grilled chicken at Popeyes. Well, I'm a lawyer, so I will never be grilling your chicken at Popeyes. And also, if you have this revenge fantasy in mind that all of us, if you're sitting there because you're so miserable, like, well, they're going to get revenge and they're going to be this and they're going to be that, I urge you to find a different coping mechanism, because the bottom line is there's not some shoe waiting to drop on the other foot. A lot of us are actually going to go, we've been privileged, and I'm going to, like, someone like me, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but I will likely continue to be privileged my whole life, which I'm so grateful for. And I urge you that if you're sitting there wanting my downfall to make yourself feel better, it's not going to happen most likely. And that shouldn't bother you. If that bothers you, if the thought that I'm probably going to go the rest of my life pretty wealthy, educated, worst case scenario, my parents are fucking rich. Like, it's just, that's what it is. If that bothers you, if you're sitting there and you're like wanting me to work at Popeyes, it's never going to happen. Not saying anything's wrong with working at Popeyes. And I urge you to find a different way to cope with your unhappiness, because this isn't going to, one, come to fruition, and two, it's not healthy. All right. Okay. I'll discredit you in the court of law. Your major is taking off your clothes. Very profound commentary. So you guys, can you please forget McDonald's? Okay, so if you guys continue, you guys are free to give your commentary on what I'm talking about, but if you guys are just going to go into an angry rampage, I will have you removed for us to be able to continue the conversation, and two, so that you don't spiral into just oblivion. We're going to talk about deaths of despair soon too, so I don't want to radicalize you guys any further. And I think maybe if I block you, you might go take a walk, touch some grass, and it'll be better for everybody. Okay, so yeah, 2 real, 1 that guy, let's block him. like the sight of you, literally new to me. Okay. And again, I'm only blocking you because I'm okay with you criticizing this, but if you're just going to be like, you stupid whore, prostitute, whore, like, there's no reason. Take a sip, touch some grass. Yes, go for a walk, call your mom, find a different activity. We wish you well because we're trying to have a discussion, and I don't think you mean to be this way. So I said this on Discord the earlier, I think it was yesterday. I do feel for these men, even though sometimes it's hard because they're praying for my demise. But I don't like. I think of it as an exercise in gratitude because these men were given the short end of the stick in a multitude of ways, and I didn't choose it. I didn't earn it. I was privileged in my life, and these men weren't. So I don't want to sit here from a privileged position and judge them when I don't know, right? Like we've talked about this before. You can't really put yourself into someone's shoes. You can only put yourself into someone's shoes as yourself, with your brains, with your atom for atom you, and then you put yourself in their shoes like, well, I wouldn't act that way. You can't really do that exercise because if you were them, atom for atom, with the exact same socialization they had, with the exact same, we're getting into my free will stuff, I would act like that too. So it's not me hating them. It's just, but at the same time, it's important to push back against this rhetoric because that can have a better effect on society as a whole. Like if we're looking at it from a consequentialist perspective, pushing back on them can actually prevent some people from going down their path. So let's see. Okay. What time is it? Okay. We're already at 7:40. Okay. There's going to be two parts to this. So yeah, so another stat I wanted to, is this the right one? I think I had a different one. Okay, well, I guess I don't know where that one is. Oh, that's why. So we talked about men needing to adapt to this new market. And one way to do that is to get them more into HEAL jobs, HEAL, health, education, administration, and literacy. And some people are like, oh, well, those are lower paying jobs. They're actually not. Some of them are, but a lot of them, like nurse practitioners, make like $100,000 a year. Like these are not all jobs that aren't great jobs. And a lot of them actually have great job security. So even in recessions, you still need teachers, you still need nurses, you still need healthcare workers, as we saw with the pandemic. You have great job security in those jobs. And one thing I will be honest about is in OnlyFans, there's no job security. So yeah. So like I said earlier, 47% of women are now working, and that has added $2 trillion more into our economy than would have been the case if women's participation remained at the levels they were in 1970s, except for those at the top 20%. So the groups in the top 20%, both genders have been doing well. All growth in household income has come from women in the past, like in recent. All of the growth in household income except for the top 20% has come from women. So again, this is just another example of I get it why men are frustrated. And a lot of those jobs that are moving towards automation and stuff are hard jobs. These are hard workers. And I get it. Like I even since 2016, where I was like, why do some people like Trump? And there's a multitude of reasons why people like Trump, but there is a group of people who just they're hardworking men who used to have these jobs and they're gone. And he pretended he's going to get them back for you. Yes, getting into mental health work and counseling is a HEAL job. So it's HEAL, H health, E education, A administration, L literacy. And there should be a push to get men into these jobs, just like there was a push to get women into STEM jobs, and it worked. Women now are represented in half of manager positions. Is it managerial? I don't know. And so a lot of male dominated professions such as medicine, finance, law are becoming female dominated too. So I think it's an aggregate effect, right? So education, we need to, and he has policy ideas about getting men more into education, which therefore gets men more into better jobs, these good jobs, kind of changing the traditional male jobs, and like a lot of these are the jobs that are masculine. No, and getting men more into these education roles has a great effect on young boys too. We're going to talk about that later, especially Black men, Black boys in particular, seem to do very well with a Black male teacher. And so having more male teachers is really great. Having more male psychologists is really great. He had a quote in there that I really liked where I don't remember the exact percentages, but he's like, most people who struggle with substance abuse are men, and there's only like 5% of therapists that deal with substance abuse that are men. You know what I mean? Like we need to make this more equal. Wait, what are the jobs that are dominated by women? I'm not saying that in a bad way, just asking. So, a lot of jobs that used to be male dominated, women are now either dominating or they're becoming equal. So, for instance, lawyers used to be very much male dominated. Now it's about 50-50. In that end, hypermasculinity is used to cope with and try to reestablish a sense of something that hasn't been felt for a long time. Yes, it doesn't inherently make it good, but it represents a lot of the community. Yeah. And so the third, so he talks about how men are falling behind in education, men are falling behind in labor, and men are falling behind when it comes to their roles in their family. So here's a great thing he said. So he argues the following. Number one, the male role has long been culturally defined as that of a provider and based on the economic dependence of mothers on men. Number two, the traditional role has been dismantled by the securing of economic independence by women. Number three, culture and policy are stuck on an obsolete model of fatherhood, lagging way behind economic reality. And four, this is resulting in a dad deficit, with men increasingly unable to fulfill the traditional breadwinner role, but yet to step into a new one. So this is a huge thing. He argues that this idea of men being the breadwinner and this is where they get their identity from is just changing, because now I think, what was it? I had it in there. It's like half of all households now, the woman is making as much or even more than the man. So the breadwinner thing is not going to be, but at the same time, while women have made these strides, we've re-envisioned the role of a woman. The role of a woman is no longer just to be at home, unless you're in the manosphere and you're struggling with your position, and now you're like, well, what we need to do is we need to bring them back. It's not happening. And there was stats about how like even the attitudes towards women working, like it used to be that when women first started working, that they used to think they weren't as good mothers, they couldn't be as warm and nurturing to their kids. Now the majority of Americans don't believe that. The term working woman is just not even used anymore. It's just something that's so normal. So the idea of a woman as a mother, as a woman in general, has been redefined and re-envisioned, but the role of a man hasn't. The role of a man is still to be the breadwinner of the family, to provide for your family. And now that that's changing because of women's access to the workforce, we haven't re-envisioned the role of a man, which we should, is one of the things that he talks about. Is it just lawyers or what else? Oh, it's everything. So doctors, finance, like I said, even like business degrees, half of them are going to women. So graduate degrees, master's degrees, pretty much all of those jobs. Like, yes. So if you're like the guy was talking about, like mechanics are still largely men, engineers are still largely men. But a lot of areas that used to be male dominated are now becoming female dominated, but areas that are female dominated men are not going into those fields. And so that is where HEAL comes in. And that's why there's so many benefits to men going into those fields. They go viral after your FNF appearance. I kind of did, but I don't know what you mean I'm not on your feed. I know for a fact that OF is women dominated, not even close. Yeah, OF is women dominated. I don't know what the point of that is. I honestly didn't know you guys would be offended by this. This whole episode is about helping men. What is it? Okay. So you guys are kind of talking to each other, which I love. But I'm going to stay focused because we have like 10 minutes. So we're going to have a part 2 to this, unless you guys just hate this topic, which is a couple of the men in here are triggered. I don't know why, because I am doing this whole episode and bringing and at the end talking about what we can do to actually combat some of these things that are going on, and to have a vision of fatherhood and masculinity that is compatible with gender equality, because that's just the reality of the world we live in. So for all of you men who say feelings and people are too concerned about feelings, facts don't care about your feelings, here you go. Facts don't care about your feelings. We are not going back. Women are not leaving the workforce. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. So you guys can either adapt, which is great, and a lot of the ways you can adapt is actually going to help you become more emotionally healthy, help you prosper in your life, or you can sit there and cry and be in your feelings. One thing I struggle with is talking effectively with you guys about this. So he had a great, I'm gonna find this because I did screenshot it, but maybe oh, this is the whole section about that. See, I didn't get to this part in my notes, but one thing, friendships, so women and men's friendships, the state of male friendships has been declining. So a lot of men don't have close friendships, which there's a great stat in here that I need to find when we get there, I guess, because right now I cannot find it. Considering the boomers are still holding a lot of positions of power in corporate and legislative realms, having that shift in education and social expectations of men will take some time. Yeah, I agree. But we should be pushing for it, because when we put enough money in programming and representation in media of something, look how quickly women change things. And I think that if we put the effort that we put into women, and the effort we put into women in education, the effort we put into women getting STEM jobs, if we did that for men, I think we could make great strides. But right now we're not doing anything about this. The only people that are doing something about this, quote unquote, is the toxic manosphere, who's giving them the wrong information and the wrong solutions. We don't have that many men like Richard Reeves who are trying to talk about this. We have people like Peterson, who he criticizes, rightfully so, for overemphasizing biology, which is anti-scientific. And not giving you them like I'm not saying telling you to clean your room and dress nice. This is good advice, but a lot of the stuff they say isn't, and it's not going to help you. What are the sources you're looking for the supposed facts? So today was basically a summary and review. We're going to obviously have to extend it to next time too. The book is Of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves, who does a lot of research, and this whole back is all of the sources. So a lot of these stats I'm getting are from this book, and they're cited from scientific journals, studies done, etc. So there's this issue with I'm noticing this issue with men in the manosphere is they can't really shy away from facts being more important, or science and studies being more important than anecdotes. So they kind of go, where are you getting that? It's probably bullshit. It's really not. And a lot of I'm just sorry, when the facts and the studies go against your narrative, they're not fake. Then maybe your narrative is what's false. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Cute saying. I don't know if that's representative of reality. Okay. So yeah, women now, so we need an image forward for fatherhood that accounts for gender equality. Women now work, and Americans, like I said, don't actually believe those old tropes about being nurturing and being a mom, is maybe little small sections of the manosphere do, but it's not representative of greater society. Another thing that I think is really interesting is this idea of keeping women down and not is actually counterproductive, because a lot of these manosphere spaces constantly talk about the marriage rate is down and feminism has blah blah blah. It's not true for college educated women. College educated women are like, for again, that upper 20% of both men and women and college educated women, they're getting married more. They, like I said, equality is easier for the affluent. So while marriage has declined and single motherhood has risen for those groups, it's decreased for people that are educated. So I think pushing for just both genders to get educated is really great. And this idea that we just need to go back in time, and that the women who are living those traditional lives seems to be doing worse, and the men in those classes are doing worse too, because I think because of a lot of this information. And I mean, we can talk about capitalism being like a big reason for a lot of this, and the wage gap and all that. Those are very valid points, but I also want to narrow the scope a little bit and talk about some of the disparities between men and women. We do need to change our thoughts on this, which the manosphere isn't helping with. So while societal attitudes are shifting for women, for men, people still believe, both genders, the studies show, think that 81%, to be a good man and husband, a man should be able to provide. 81% of Americans agree with that. So there's still so much pressure on men to be in this breadwinner role, and there's really no other identity for them other than this role, and their place in this role is just changing. How has the book changed how you approach talking about this with men? It's given me more data and statistics and maybe actual solutions to actually bring forward, because Richard did a lot of the work for me. So a lot of the stuff he's saying is stuff that I've kind of known, but having the data to back it up and having proposed policy ideas, and also put some of the critiques to those policy ideas and responses to those ideas are good. So when I'm actually having this discussion with men that aren't like mad that I do porn, I think these are going to be great. Come after me for this, but isn't college women dominated but still make less money than men? So there is still a wage gap, but it's decreased a lot. And actually, you guys haven't actually made more money. You guys are making less money. We're making more. If we look at since the 1970s, you guys are making less. So again, this isn't me trying to say men against women. I'm just trying to tell you that if you're going to rely on this message of male superiority because it's a coping mechanism that the manosphere has given you guys to make you think that society is just holding you down, which you can say to a point that's true, and you are actually better, and we don't know what we're doing, and women being in this has ruined everything. That's just quite simply not true, and you're not going to win on that front. So I think books like this and voices and academics like this and voices in this space like this, people who are educated, have done the research, not like Myron and Fresh's, illiterate ass. It's going to be better serving. It's going to serve you. Marriage is no longer an economic necessity, but a choice. So it's interesting that you see the people that making that choice more often are women in the more affluent women. What was the economically independent women can now flourish whether they are wives or not. Wifeless men, by contrast, often a mess. Compared to married men, their health is worse, their employment rates are lower, and their social networks are weaker. Drug-related deaths among never married men more than doubled in a decade from 2010. So the marriage rate going down seems to be disproportionately affecting men. So a lot of times in the manosphere, they focus a lot on, divorce and women are trying to take your money. It's weird because it's not one study, it's not two studies. This is literally on lawyers, like divorce attorneys, is like pages. Like when they're talking about the negative effects, women actually fare off far worse financially in divorce. They're more likely to be in poverty, seek government assistance. Their standard of living is more likely to decrease. They're actually less likely to be repartnered, which is another thing that manosphere tell you is, they're going to leave. You shouldn't try to find a better man. They're just feeding on really insecure men. But what they don't focus on is that men fare off far worse psychologically without women and after divorce. They have higher rates of suicide, drug abuse, like social networks are weaker. And I think it's a good point that a lot of men, when they have a woman around, the woman kind of facilitates social gatherings and stuff. So you do see that when men are separated from women, they kind of retreat. They don't have strong networks. They don't get out of the house as much. These are really bad things for women. I mean, for men. And these are the things that should be talked about more in these spaces, not how much women are going to take your money, which is just, again, diametrically opposed to all available data that we have. How to be a good man according to the stagnant views from 1950s now. Breadwinner, work harder, have family, die. Yeah. So something interesting is, again, it's about, I think, identity and restructuring male identity. So in 2017, they did Pew Research did a really great, oh, it's a fly. What is that? Pew Research did a great, they asked people in a survey, what is the meaning of life? And women were far more likely to find meaning across multiple domains. So equal with work. So for work, they both, they had the same. So when men and women showed equal, they found meaning at equal, to an equal degree, but there was an equal degree of that between men and women. But women were far more likely to also find meaning in other aspects of their life where men weren't, because we've just programmed men to think that their worth is based on their ability to be a breadwinner. And we haven't done that to women. So women are faring better in that way than men are, because men are like, a lot of men are more likely to take losing their job like super harshly. They're more likely to, feel like they have no place in the world if they're not the breadwinner, which is one of the reasons that they're struggling so much. Am I too late? You're not too late. Oh shit, actually you are, because it's 8. But I urge you guys, if you missed it, or I guess if you're here you didn't miss it, to watch this, because next week we're going to do a part 2, because this has so many ramifications and more we can talk about. So yeah, right now men have a narrower range of sources of meaning and identity, which makes them particularly vulnerable if any one of the sources is damaged. Men seem to take a bigger dent in their happiness, for example, if they lose their job. As well as being good for children, a stronger role for fathers would provide many men with a powerful extra source of purpose and meaning in their life. So we're going to get into that. Deaths of despair, all of that, and some solutions to all 3 of these: labor, identity and role as a man in society, and what we can do for education. Talked a little bit about the education, more vocational work being put into school, starting boys a couple years later or a year later when their prefrontal cortex is more caught up to that of girls, and pushing for more heal type jobs, health, education, administration, literacy. So those were the main solutions for the first one, but we haven't even talked about the solutions for the other one. So I'm really excited. Haha, thoughts with this. Brilliant thoughts with thoughts. Yeah. The book was great so far. I'm on chapter 2. Yeah, I recommend this book. If you guys have time, it's not a long read at all. If you guys have time, try to read at least some of it before next week, because obviously if you've read it, you might have more commentary on it and you might be able to engage in the discussion more. But we will pick up where we left off next time, which is probably going to be next Monday, because my plan is when I go from Santa Barbara to LA, I'm going to do that Monday. It's like an hour and a half. And if I'm alone, I don't know if my friend's coming with me. That's the problem. If she's not coming with me, I'm going to bring my laptop and I will stream from the hotel room, and we will have a part 2. If not, we will have it later in the week. But that's actually great for me because I've already read it. I just need to clean up my notes on it. And that way we can finish the discussion and give it all the time it deserves. So yeah, okay, we're going to switch gears now. We're going to go to OnlyFans, get freaky deaky. So if that's what you're into, catch me there. We're going to move to the bed, and let's continue the chat in Discord, folks. Yeah, but not for the next like 30 minutes to an hour, because we need to have sexy time. Then we can finish the discussion in the Discord, and save a lot of those talking points also for next week's stream, because I'm excited for it. Wife teaches pre-K, and they almost always recommend holding back boys with later birth. Yeah, that's a big thing. And like one of the things that also can help men in education is having more male teachers, and that seems to really have a great impact on our boys. So Discord gang represent. Okay, so how do I get on Discord? It's invite, but if you DM me on Instagram, then I can let you know about that. Okay, catch you on OnlyFans. If not, I will catch you next week. Follow my socials for updates, and especially Instagram. If you're not on a paid platform, then Instagram is the best place. All right. Mwah.